forgive me for this trap shit. Sergeant Smack making backflip. Telly Hank did with the action. With the Vato speaking Spanish. Frank Matthews, how I vanish. Poof. Came back like I'm King Tut. Gold BBS is on a beamer. When Fat Cat was 10 queens up. Ball off the profit, not the re-up. Fly like Puerto Rican Jesus. Uptown like I'm Baby May. Just caught a touchdown from the Bay.
Officials say drug dealers from New York City and elsewhere have come to Washington to carve out a share of the city's drug trade. Washington's Mayor Marion Barry.
The New York contingency is heavily armed, unlike before where you had local people involved. And according to police, the local drug dealers and drug sellers themselves have to become heavily armed. And I would say 80% of the murders we've had here have been drug users and drug dealers killing each other. They're just mean, and therefore life has no value, apparently.
Okay, well, you mentioned in one of your interviews that during that time in D.C., death was in the air. And any little infraction would really cause just the worst effects in terms of murders and killing and everything else like that. Describe that environment and how bad things were getting during that time.
It was tough, you know what I'm saying, because at the time when crack hit, it ended up bringing guests into the house. When I say guests, you're talking out of town as far as like New York guys and Jamaica's guys. So when they came down, you know, putting their flag down or trying to put their flag down, it caused frictions and beefs. And in turn, people start getting a lot of money. Just imagine what you're saying right now today with all the killing. And if you say all these crews that you see all this killing around the city, around the country, had real money with their movement. So that's what you got pictured in the 80s. A whole bunch of killing, but dudes got money while they doing it.
Okay.
Turning to legal news, this weekend, District of Columbia Police reestablished a series of checkpoints in a neighborhood racked by a string of shootings and stabbings. Thalia Shuras has more on the show of force that has both strong supporters and outspoken critics.
Washington's police chief called the recent violence in the capital's troubled Trinidad section a brazen assault.
To shoot two 13-year-old children in the back or shoot them as they're trying to get away is the most cowardice act I have seen in 18 years.
In the early hours yesterday, one person was stabbed and 7 people were shot, one of them a 13-year-old boy who later died. Trinidad, just 4 miles east of the White House, is a neighborhood in transition. But in this police district, 22 people were killed through June, more than double the number in the same period last year.
AP, you stop this car?
Up went controversial checkpoints in an effort to stem violence by fencing out intruders.
Any reason why you passing through Trinidad today?
I live 2 blocks up the street.
Checkpoints in this area were initially set up last month after a similar spike in violence over 9 hours left 7 men dead. But the program also sparked a lawsuit.
In 2008, residents of one Washington, D.C. neighborhood just 4 miles east of the White House woke up to a different kind of war zone. Police checkpoints blocked every entrance. Officers stopped drivers, demanded explanations, and turned people away from their homes. They called it a neighborhood safety zone, but those who lived there felt like it was martial law. To outsiders, it would look like an overreaction, an extreme response to a spike in street violence. But to those who knew the history of these blocks, it made sense because decades earlier, this same corner of the city wasn't just violent. It was war-torn, torn apart by 2 brothers whose grip on Trinidad was so absolute, it would take bullets, indictments, and blood to break it. And even decades after they vanished, the memory of what they built still haunted the pavement.
Me and him became real cool. He got killed later on, but me and him became real cool. So I wound up hooking up with this kid named Cliff Cobbs. Okay. He come from a real known neighborhood in D.C. Okay. and a lot of people respected him and his brother Roy, and that whole little crew. It was a whole little crew of them. Because DC, they quick for their guns, man. Okay. They kill you in a minute, especially if they know you're from out of town. So,
for Washington, D.C. police, an aggressive new approach to a persistent problem. A military-styled vehicle checkpoint in the city's crime-plagued Trinidad neighborhood, an effort police say to stop the killing. A week ago, over a 9-hour period, 7 people died and 3 others were wounded here. So far, reaction to the checkpoints has been mixed.
Welcome to Baghdad, D.C. I guess we're going to have checkpoints here like they have in Baghdad.
I think it's a good idea. I think you should be around here more often. You know, save people's lives, man.
After months of soaring violence, the city's mayor was desperate for a solution.
You want it to go down dramatically, and in order to do so, we're going to have to think outside the box.
That includes checkpoints, where cops question motorists, take down license plates, and turn away those who don't have a reason to be there.
I am sending a message that I want the criminals to hear, and I want them to hear me now. Don't try and come into Trinidad and cause trouble, because we're not going to let you in.
While careful not to proclaim victory, D.C. police say they are in fact encouraged. They reported no gunfire or killings here overnight, but it's the tactic that they use, limiting access to this neighborhood, that's being watched very carefully.
The idea of an American city, let alone the capital city, essentially cordoning off whole neighborhoods, really runs contrary to both the Constitution and American values.
New York City police tried it back in 1992 in the Bronx because of drug violence and drive-by shootings, and a federal appeals court found it legal. But in Washington, some feel uncomfortable.
It would be much better if what they did was have foot patrol, have people on that corner like they have right now, as opposed to just barricading and blockading everything.
Wondering if the plan will really work and at what cost.
Trinidad is a small neighborhood, less than half of a square mile in size and fewer than 6,000 residents. Now, that's smaller than many single housing projects in New York City, and even smaller than some gated subdivisions in suburban areas. And yet, in 2008, it will become the only neighborhood in Washington, D.C.'s history to be sealed off by military-style police checkpoints, with drivers routinely being stopped and questioned without warrant or without suspicion. This kind of hard perimeter control had never been implemented in the nation's capital, not in larger or more volatile neighborhoods, and not even during the peak of the city's crack epidemic, when D.C. was known as the murder capital of America. Even amongst the city's most violent pockets, places like Congress Heights, Simple City, or Berry Farms, Trinidad stands out not just for its body count, but for its concentrated intensity of violence and the deep territorial control that would fuel it. And what would make the checkpoints more surreal than anything was the timing. Because in my eyes, this didn't happen at the height of the city's violence, but decades after the reign of the Cobb brothers over this area.
Yeah. So all that shit about he was doing this, he that, niggas weren't scared of that nigga.
Because obviously people were still trying to get out of here. Was trying to still get out there.
Yeah, for sure. Roy still was leaning on folk. We was fucking with them.
Oh, the guy Roy was at Alpo ass too? He wasn't just on Raveful?
He had words with Poe. Actually, when Poe came to see us around 16.
What's the guy name?
Roy. He got killed, Roy Cobb.
Roy Cobb.
He was running Trinidad on that Martello side, far as anything moved, he wasn't in.
He's an older guy?
He older than me, way older.
OG?
Yeah. If anything been sold in Trinidad, he wasn't in.
So he was out there stepping in the Rayful and Alpo.
Yeah.
It was niggas like that on the prowl in DC in the 80s, man.
Yeah, a lot of them. Not just them, a lot of them.
Today, the neighborhood in Trinidad stands gentrified, quiet, and bright. But at the end of the 1980s and the 1990s, it was a war zone. Every block a battlefield in DC's exploding drug trade. Every corner of the city had its power players. And in Trinidad, a lot of that power belonged to the Cobb brothers, Roy and Cliff, two brothers that would epitomize what the time was like when the district would become the murder capital. Because in the time in DC, when you was either known as a hustler or a killer, they allegedly were both. They didn't just sell drugs. They was heavy on the soft extortion, and they was with the gunplay. And their story would begin to take shape in a bloody Trinidad neighborhood and around 1988 with another rarely mentioned up-and-coming hustler from DC at the time by the name of Brandon Terrell. Now, based on my research, Brandon Terrell, not a kingpin, but at the time, he was fastly becoming one of DC's most reputable names. And according to an article in the Washington Post, he was said to run with a Trinidad-based crew believed to be aligned with the Cobb brothers. And what would set the teenage Brandon Terrell apart from a lot of the hustlers in DC wasn't the money or the muscle. It was he had a direct connection to Rayful Edmonds, a man who went on to be, and even at that time, was the city's most infamous drug kingpin. And that relationship would give him access to major quantities of narcotics, along with any clout that might come in the form of being mentioned in the same circle of guys like Rayful Edmonds. But during that summer of 1988, a dispute would ignite where, according to court records, the up-and-coming Brandon Terrell would refuse to return a large quantity of cocaine, while what the paper calls attempting to renegotiate control of the Trinidad neighborhood. And based on my research of Brandon Terrell and how the Cobb brothers moved, I think that looked like them getting to work than trying to renegotiate a better price after they got it. And in this specific situation between Brandon Terrell and Rayful, he would allegedly exchange words with Rayful inside of a Chapter 3 nightclub, with people testifying that it was reportedly him insulting Rayful's authority. Fast forwarding to that same exact night, outside of the club, a guy by the name of Columbus Little Nut Daniels, who was said to be a known Rayful Edmonds enforcer, would shoot Brandon Terrell several times. And although Little Nut was only convicted of second-degree murder, witnesses would testify that Rayful Edmonds had pretty much ordered the hit, and I didn't find any direct connection between the young Brandon Terrell and the Cobb brothers, but locally he would be identified as the leader at the time of the Trinidad group, according to police sources in the Washington Post. And even though no direct connection could be found between him and the two brothers, if you pay attention to the timeline, you will be able to connect the dots in blood, because it wouldn't be long after his execution outside of the Chapter 3 that bodies would begin falling, starting on July 27th of 1988, just over a month after, when Derek L. Clark, a 28-year-old who would be tied to Rayful Edmonds' crew, would be walking near 1101 16th Street Northeast when he was ambushed and shot 5 times in the back. Bleeding and conscious still, he would give a dying declaration identifying Cliff Cobb as his killer. Then, just 6 days after that killing, on August 3rd, 1988, police would discover the body of a 20-year-old Eric Lee Carter behind 1200 Megas Place in Northeast. Another person allegedly connected to the Rayful Edmonds drug organization. He would be found shot multiple times before dying, also identifying Cliff Cobb as his killer. 2 murders in the span of a week, both shooting victims fitting the same profile, being connected to the Rayful Edmonds drug organization. And by late August of that year, Cliff Cobb would be in front of a judge facing murder charges for both killings. And it would be over the course of that next year where Washington, D.C. would earn the reputation of the most deadliest city in the United States, with the drugs and the drug wars essentially causing chaos right outside of the White House, with a lot of it, 60% in fact, being attributed to Rayful Edmonds, leading to his arrest in April of 1989. But it wouldn't be until 3 years later in 1992 when you would get the next shift in the story of the Cobb brothers, when federal wiretaps and DEA intel would reveal that 2 guys by the name of Rodney Moore and Kevin Gray, and some articles considered prodigies of Rayful Edmonds, would go on to broker a 200-kilogram cocaine deal on Rayful's behalf while Rayful was incarcerated. Years later, at their trial, where they were said to run the most murderous drug organization, prosecutors would describe the Moore and Gray organization almost as an extension to Rayful's. The same network, similar reach, but even more ruthlessness. But the next domino wouldn't fall until 6 years later, or a decade from when Cliff would be indicted for the 2 murders in 1998, when at that time DC was a little bit quieter, but Trinidad was still hot. And on October 15th of that year, Roy Cobb, Cliff's brother and longtime Trinidad strongman, would be murdered outside his girlfriend's beauty salon near Howard University. Committed during broad day, his murder was public and strategic. Shot multiple times, no warning and no chance of escape. And his killer, a notorious DC hitman by the name of Oscar Ville, who would later go on to become a government witness. In a later trial, after he would be accused of committing 7 murders, he would testify that he had initially scouted out Roy Cobb near the Ludlow Taylor Elementary School. But unlike nowadays, he would abort his mission when he would find Roy allegedly with his girlfriend's children, going on to say that he would spot Cobb weeks later where he stood alone, no kids, no hesitation. Ville would allegedly approach him silently and shoot him execution style, with some reports even saying that the gun jammed, he would go unjam the gun to go finish off Roy, before admitting that he would do it on the orders of Rodney Moore, who had believed that Roy Cobb had put a hit out on either him or his partner Kevin Gray. And within a span of 10 years or so, from the murder of the young Brandon Terrell in June of 1988 to a decade later in October of 1998, when Roy Cobb would be executed, nobody's story probably epitomizes the drug wars in Washington, D.C. more than the Cobb brothers. Not much was said or printed about Cliff Cobb's status and the charges that he faced. But based on my research, I did see that he was still alive in 2015 when he would be mentioned in his mother, Lillian Cobb's obituary. Now, y'all make sure y'all hit the red bell and subscribe button right under this video so y'all know when this real Trill Spill shit is dropping. Y'all get in the comment box below. Y'all let me know what cities we need to go to, what stories we need to tell, what we missed, what we got wrong, all of that. Y'all make sure y'all tap in with me directly on Instagram, Twitter, POP_A_LOT. And until our next jug, you know how we rocking. Shades Popalot. Salute the almighty MOBB.